AWIEF remains Africa's #1 women entrepreneurs conference and exhibition, bridging the gap between investors, women entrepreneurs, policymakers, and industry game changers. AWIEF relies on global strategic partnerships with organizations such as the African Development Bank, UN Women, CTAEU, and Thomson Reuters to effectively drive the agenda for women in business in Africa.
For having me. Thank you, AWIEF, for walking this journey with the African Development Bank. I'm from a development bank, so I have to tell you that gender inequality is costing Africa $95 billion a year. That's about 6% of our GDP. The economic and social development of this continent hinges on the sustained participation of women across all levels. And at the African Development Bank, we truly believe that women form the backbone of Africa's economies.
I think as the UN, obviously, what I should just sort of help you think about is what we're trying to do at a global scale, but also continentally, and then how we support countries to do that. Really under the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. As you know, we have a Sustainable Development Goal, Goal 5. We call it High Five, just like ADB calls it High Five. A key area where we're working as UN Women across the world is in the space of market development and market access, right? And a simple one is the issue of public procurement. You were talking here earlier about Shell supply chains. But just to say that across the world, 34% of GDPs in most countries come from public procurement. And yet only 1% of that goes to women.
In order to affect long-term change, policies need to be changed at a decision-making level. Our annual ministerial panel addresses the impact and agility of policies on inclusive, sustainable economic development.
If we know that economic performance is tied to giving the girl child education, it would help us to then understand why it is that in societies where we have not attained significant level of gender parity in education, there is often the tendency that the women are...
Well, the benefit of a seminar like this is that it enables women to be in the midst of other women, and today's world is a world built on collaborative partnership. It's a world where there is something called the crowdsourcing of knowledge, of solutions. And so when women come to gatherings like this, where very important topics like innovation and entrepreneurship are being discussed, they learn a lot of things that would enable them overcome the hurdles, the obstacles, the constraints.
Our speakers range from experts in their sectors within the African economy, as well as entrepreneurs and pioneers across the board from all over the world, empowering our entrepreneurs with knowledge and thought leadership in every sector.
66% of all the work done in the world is done by women. 50% of all the food produced in the world is produced by women. But only 10% of the salaries in the world are earned by women. And to me, the most frightening of all, only 1% of the land in the world is owned by women.
Creative economies of their own. And so for me, I've had the opportunity of working with Jay-Z's brand Rockaware. I've worked with Sean John, which is Diddy's brand. Also worked with Beyonce's brand called Darion.
So we decided to go with a definition of infrastructure that really is beyond the normal. We talk about a trilogy of infrastructure. So we talk about the physical infrastructure, your roads, your bridges, the built environment, the things that are necessary to lay the groundwork, sewage, water, right? Then we sat down and we said, well, hold on for a second. We're going into an industry, a sector that women in Africa, globally actually, less than 1%. And just to give you an overview of the numbers that we're talking about, according to McKinsey, $150 million per annum is what is necessary to deal with the infrastructure deficit in sub-Saharan Africa alone, per annum. We did our own research and we figured out that there is $400 billion dollars that's earmarked for infrastructure investment in sub-Saharan Africa over the next decade. Imagine if we just captured 10% of that in terms of bringing in the sector.
We heard yesterday about the importance of including rural women. So do they have access to ICT? In Africa, the average internet penetration is 26%, versus in North America, it's 88%. In Europe, 79%. In Latin America, 59%. In Africa, 26%. So that's a large aspect. That's more than the majority are not being brought into this knowledge economy. And the means of doing that is providing access to ICT infrastructure.
AWIEF partnered with City A, which is an EU-funded institution, and AWAN on the Value for Her, a continental initiative to strengthen women's agribusiness enterprises along the value chain.
I come from a school of thought where if you want a farmer to understand his value, then you've got to make him a part of that process. Our problem is that we tend to make farmers just the producer. Okay, one of the things, for example, in Ghana right now, there's this whole project the government has put in that's called the One District, One Factory. So every district should have a factory. One of the challenges I've thrown to the government is this: how can we ensure that everybody in that value chain is a stakeholder in that factory? Whether it's as a shareholder, whatever else, whether it's a logistic person, whether it's the farmer, because then at least when he knows that he's going to price his products well, the company will make a success. If he outsells himself, the company fails. So we need to start making this efficient economy inclusive growth. Where does Westgrow see this? Because I have looked at the aspect where Westgrow tends to look at investments, and I think it's more out in trying to see how we can bring people in into this. But taking into account that 60 to 80% of food production comes out, of Africa, it's women. It's sad that only 20% of that is women landowners, obviously because we know the patriarchal situation. So where do you see that role coming in terms of moving farmers and especially women to become part of this whole growth process and stakeholders in the value chain?
I started off with 100 chickens in my backyard for own consumption, and that was every 2 months. And now we are processing 115,000 a week. Now you can go, wow, that's a lot. But in South Africa, the business is about 20 million birds a week. So I'm still insignificant. But it's through taking it from primary to agro-processing that I've been able to grow the business. And I truly believe that farmers in Africa need to keep on thinking how you can do the next step.
AWIEF, driving the agenda for women in business in Africa. Our business is to advocate women empowerment with women entrepreneurs as catalysts of sustainable economic development.
How many of you here know our Airbnb? Perfect. Now let's take out the example of Cape Town out of the whole African example of Airbnb, because what happened to Cape Town with Airbnb is just an exception that confirms the rule. Cape Town provides 25% of African revenue for Airbnb. Cape Town provides 25% of inventory of Africa for Airbnb, but I think we will all agree that Cape Town is not a good example of what Africa is. Okay, so now we have that aside. We have to agree and notice that there are specific business models that will never be able to grow if the market is not ready, socially speaking.
The 15 million that you're looking, seeking investors, would they be investing in your business, or would they be investing directly into the distressed businesses that you're investing in?
We're not averse to co-investments, so the 15 million rand is to go into the actual fund structure. We actually, the fund manager itself, at the moment we're seeding ourselves.
One of the winners is Kathy from Private Fund Managers.